Kamille, welcome to the show.
High achievement does not necessarily mean just the results. I am a 7-figure entrepreneur. This is who I am. I'm just on the road right now towards that. High standards is good. Perfectionism as a defense to criticism, fear of rejection, fear of failure, that's not your friend. What I like to coach on are now there are the subtle enemies. The first subtle enemy to success is
the pleasure is truly all ours here at the Market Authority Summit. I want to start with, why do you need to be here today?
Me specifically, or everyone here?
You specifically.
So the first thing that comes to mind when I think of why I need to be here is because I love seeing people succeed. And not just in business, not just in finances, but in who they are as an individual. Like I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe in people's, what I consider their God-given potential to be fully lived out. And it almost breaks my heart when I see someone who, they have all of this passion, desire, vision in their life, and for whatever reason, they feel like they can't pursue that, or life has just, hit them really hard and they feel like there are limitations. And so one of my biggest missions in life is to help people break through those fears. And I just know that a great part of that starts from the battle in our mind. It's one of the most subtle, most difficult things to overcome. And I specifically get to work with high achievers. So as a peak performance coach, I take those who are already playing at a high level and then just help them blast through to the next. And then for a lot of folks, it's like, I didn't even know there was a next level of me. And what's fascinating is it's not about working more or even harder, but it's often about thinking just that much differently about a situation. And then it just opens up a whole new world of possibilities. So other than the experience that I have, the educational background, I would say it's more my passion that I just want to see you play full out so that you can have the impact not on just your own life, but your family's life, the world at large. And the last thing I will say is, I think on a global scale, I'm really passionate about seeing what I call leaders of love. I think there's a lot of leaders out there, a lot of influencers, a lot of people who have impact that isn't always so positive. And if I can play a pivotal role in those who have influence to make a loving, positive impact, then I want to do that. And I just know what leaders often struggle with is feeling alone, and that they don't have wise counsel that they can trust around them. And that's where I come in. I'm kind of the wise counsel in the back pocket for a lot of CEOs like you, and then for many of the high achievers that I get to work with.
Already so happy to have you here. When we are thinking about high achievers, I want to make sure that everyone in the room can see themselves as that high achiever. Can you define high achievers for those who are extraordinarily hardworking and who are putting themselves out there, being extremely vulnerable in the way that they are leading through love, right, in their markets, but maybe they haven't seen the results just yet? Can you speak to that?
So a high achiever is anybody who knows that I am willing to go past my comfort zone on this. And each of us has different thresholds for a comfort zone. So for some folks, it's a financial comfort zone. For other folks, it's a work comfort zone. For other people, it is a relational or mindset comfort zone. But anyone who has that even desire to be like, you know what, I want to do something just a little bit past that. What does the landscape look like just one step further, 1 mile further? I would say that that's a high achiever. Another piece to it, and I love that you said this, I want everyone here to see themselves as that. And that's why I started with the desire to go a little bit past your comfort zone, because high achievement does not necessarily mean just the results. And I think when we do workshops today, I know this is a podcast, but if y'all are lucky to come to the live MAA Summit in the future, when we do the workshop portion of this, we're going to be talking about that not only past the comfort zone, but how do I phrase this? That you're no longer working from a place of, I want this result. You're working from a place of, this is who I am. And it's a very different, and this is what I was talking about with the subtle, the 2 millimeter shifts, the small hinges that swing big doors. And in psychology, we call it identity-based motivation. But you're not saying like, I want to make $1 million. And so these are the things I got to do. It's, I am a 7-figure entrepreneur. This is who I am. I'm just on the road right now towards that. And that's going to shape how you handle difficulty, setback, because it's inevitable. You know this. There's no such thing as just straight lines of success. I know we see that on Instagram, right? We hear it on TikTok. And people are like, yeah, every motivational speaker says that. But to live it is a much different experience. So I hope that answers the question.
Beautifully. I have had experiences where it's like the crying on the bathroom floor moment, and then you clean yourself up, and then you see a DM on Instagram saying, I don't know how you do it all.
Yes.
It's like, yeah, what? What is happening there? What needs to be addressed in our mindset? You speak of the subtle enemies of success.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that a bit?
So these subtle enemies, the reason I call it this is because there are the obvious enemies of success, which I think many of us know. I got to get my calendar together. I need to have a better morning routine. I got a cold plunge, right? Like all of these very fad-like things that the enemies to my success is the fact that I'm not showing up and that I'm not, scheduling properly and I need all these systems, or I'm distracted by my DMs and I'm distracted by my emails. So those are the obvious ones. And for most people who pursue performance coaching or leadership coaching, they already know, okay, these are the things I got to get rid of in my life in order to stay focused. But what I like to coach on there are the subtle enemies. Once you are hyper aware of the very obvious things, and again, high performers know this is why they're high performers. It's because, okay, I don't do those things that quote unquote everyone else does. I've overcome that piece. But now, when you're at this next level of your game, I want people to become aware that they're now the subtle enemies. And what are those subtle enemies? I've whittled it down to about 3 common patterns that I've seen. So I've been coaching high performers for about a decade now. And I'm going to say 3 that are going to sound like good things. That when you hear it, you're like, Kamille, how is that an enemy to our success? And that's why I say it's subtle. So the first subtle enemy to success is called working harder/more. And especially here in the Western part of the world, we're filming this in the United States. A lot of Americans, that's our virtue, right? Pull yourself up from your bootstraps, work harder, work more, grind it out, 100-hour week, let's go. And there's nothing wrong with working harder. But if someone is just constantly saying that in order to get to the next level, I just gotta work harder, I just gotta work more, that's the solution, then you're missing out a key component. That's why I say that can actually be your biggest folly, is because it's now taking the focus away from, but are you leveraging the right systems for your strengths? Are you really optimizing what you really have? Because the default pattern is, well, I just need to work more hours. That's my issue, Coach K. That's my issue, Stephanie. And maybe you do need to put in a little extra work, but I don't think that's the only issue. Because again, to my next level people, it's like, all right, I've created some success, but what's the next level? It's more about optimizing and leveraging. Often it's called the do, delegate, and delete, right? And that's what I call the antidote. So the nice thing is, yes, there's a subtle enemy to success, but there's also the antidote. And the antidote to the people who are like, work harder, work more, is do, delegate, delete. Before you decide to add another hour of work, ask yourself, have I really optimized this hour? Am I working efficiently? Am I working intelligently? And that requires a lot more reflection than usual. I want to pause there just for a second before I get into subtle enemy number 2, but any thoughts on working harder or more?
I want to know if there are any common themes behind the do, delegate, and delete. Is there anything that tends to be a pattern when the people that you work with go through this exercise?
A pattern of success or a pattern of failure?
A pattern of things that may need to be deleted or things that they need to be delegating, or is it just so dependent on the individual? And what I'm wondering is if there's something that we can kind of pick out of that everyone can kind of look introspectively and say, oh, that's something that I can apply today.
I would say that delegation is probably one of the more high-level skills for people who are getting to that 10x or 100x thing. And when I say delegation is a skill, it's not a matter of just, okay, yeah, I just got to find a VA or somebody to just like throw this information to. Because how many of you have had an assistant, found someone, and it was more of a headache than it was actually a help? And that's typically not the fault of the person that we brought in. That's our fault as a leader, which means we didn't know how to delegate well. And even in delegation, there's often two questions I like to tell leaders to reflect on. Number one, who is truly the right person for this task? I'll give you an example. So I just was working with someone yesterday, and she is training a new VA for a CEO. And she's just complaining onboarding this VA. And I said, well, why did you bring this VA on in the first place? And she said, well, the CEO is very high D. So if you've ever taken the DISC assessment, it's very high dominant, high decision, impulsive, doesn't think too much, doesn't like details. So the VA was brought in to handle a lot of these details. I said, okay, great. So what's your frustration with onboarding her? And she was telling me, the one who was training the VA, the virtual assistant, well, the VA is also high D. And then I said, oh. And I said, well, is she also high C, which again, a DISC assessment, that's, high detail, high organized. She goes, no. And I said, okay, so why did the CEO bring her on? And she goes, that's what I'm saying. I don't know. He just made the decision, and it's frustrating her because the very person, he was like, well, then just give it to this person and she'll take care of it. She doesn't have the right skill sets for the very thing that he needed. So yes, he got someone in place, but he didn't get the right person in place. And then the closest and probably even more simple analogy I can give, so I love basketball. It's like my first sport love. Like if I'm looking for a point guard, that's usually the shortest person to pass the ball. But then I bring in like a 7'5" person who just dunks all day and doesn't know how to pass the ball. Yeah, I got a person in the position, but they're playing the wrong position entirely. So that's the first skill set with delegation, is you really have to know, well, who is the right person with the right skill sets for the thing that I'm looking for? And then the second is, do I have a system for delegation? So the system for delegation is basically, all right, and a simple one you could do is kind of called the 4 levels of priority, which means if I'm delegating to somebody, I need to be able to tell this person, hey, this is level 1 priority, meaning like done now in the next 30 minutes. Level 2 priority, you can take a day to research this, but I need it done by tomorrow. Level 3 priority, you can take the week, we just need it done by Sunday. Level 4 priority, this is something I want you to think about, but maybe we'll revisit this in 6 months. Because one of the worst things we do is when we delegate to the VA or whoever, they go, okay, they do it, and then we have these unspoken expectations, and when they don't meet those unspoken expectations, it's their fault, or we get frustrated. So the question we always want to ask as a leader when we delegate is, have I set up this person for success or failure? Are they even the right person for the position? Have I clearly defined what I need and by when? And then the last thing I like to think about is, do they have the right tools and skill sets to get it done? Do they have the computer? Do they know how to use Canva? Do they even know how to use a Word doc, right? Because if they don't, okay, then I got to set you up for success and train you on that. So that's a probably more important skill set for them to learn.
Given all of that, it sounds like there's a lot of work that the realtor in this example needs to do to make sure that they are delegating effectively. What do you say to the realtor who hears that and they say, I'm just going to do it myself. That's too much for me right now. I have too much on my plate. It's not worth it to stop what I'm doing to make sure that this is set up properly. I'll just continue burning the candle at both ends.
That's okay if you just want to maintain where you're at and not grow. So there's nothing wrong with it. I have a lot of realtors who decided, I don't want to grow a team. I'm just going to decide to be a solo agent. I'm going to work this way. I want this level of success. I'm cool with it. Me and my family are good. And that's fine. Delegation is really for the person who, I want to scale. And scaling doesn't necessarily mean I want a huge team. It just means I want to scale my time. I want to scale my freedom. I don't want to always be the main person. I want to be able to go on vacation with my family and know that things are taken care of on the back end. And if that's the case, then there is some investment on the front. Because the thing to remember for real estate folks is you are not just an agent, you're a business owner. And when you make that mental shift, that's different, because you've got your, what I like to call your craft, which is being an agent. You know real estate, you know how to sell, you know how to talk to buyers, you know how to negotiate, that's your craft. That's like your art. So you know how to do that really well. But then you also have to have your CEO hat. And your CEO hat is very different. This is where you think like a business owner, like, okay, I'm running a business. I'm not just selling real estate, again, craft. But to run a business, I have to have these skills so I have a successful business. And what is a business? Something that can keep running even without me. It doesn't mean it's supposed to run without you, because maybe you're a critical component. But I think for a lot of agents where they struggle is they trap themselves in just a job, but not an actual business. And so again, for that person, it's like, oh, it's gonna take too much time. It is, because that's business. Business takes time, it takes investment up front. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, certainly. I might have more questions I'm gonna loop back, but let's talk about the second subtle enemy.
So if the first subtle enemy is, I gotta work harder, I gotta work more, and the antidote is, well, do delegate and delete, because is it really optimized for efficiency? Before you got another hour, let's look at that. The second subtle enemy is needing more info. So I hear this, and these are for and I know we're looking out here because there's an audience in front of us, but I gotta do a little bit more research. But I gotta run this through Google, or I have to read more blogs, or I have to go through Reddit. And needing more info is not bad. We wanna make a sound, logical, practical decision that's wise for your business, right? So I'm not saying be like all my high D people who are just super impulsive, like let's go, ask for forgiveness later sort of thing. But for my people who love research, it is your comfort blanket. Oh, I just want more info. I want to listen to another podcast on this. I want to buy another course. Oh, that thing, that $97 course that I just saw on Instagram, that's the one that's going to take me to the $1 million level. I know it because the last $97 course that was the same didn't work. And the one prior to that one, she was a little different. I didn't like her either. And the same thing that's teaching me the same thing, that's a little cheaper because I found the promo code, that's the one. That's it, right? And I'm saying this, there's laughter in the background because that's knowing laughter is what we call that. It's not about more info. So the antidote is use the info you already have. You have more than enough. As we know, business is a lot of trial and error. There is no such thing, which will lead me actually to the third subtle enemy soon enough. But a really quick hack for my need more information, need more info people, give yourself a deadline for the decision. I call it the decision deadline. Yes, I'm gonna give myself leeway to research till the cows come home until December 15th, 2020, whatever, fill in the blank, right? You have to give yourself a deadline, because if not, again, you're gonna research for 6 months, 12 months, 3 weeks, 2 weeks, and you'll end up in analysis paralysis because now I have so much information to calculate and you're trying to be like ChatGPT or Gemini. Like you are not an AI algorithmic model, like you need to move forward with something. And often the people who are succeeding past you, your quote unquote competition, is only because they got it done faster than you and they're just making new iterations of the thing that they already put out. And then you're criticizing them because you're like, oh, that was so ugly. How come they got the business and I didn't? And I was like, because they put something out. They're not better than you. It probably won't look as good as you. It probably doesn't have better content than you. But the difference is they went out there. They said something. They made the ask. They met with the client. They made the phone call. Even if they stumbled through it, they made the connection. And then they'll, sort of correct as they go along with that feedback. So for my needing more info folks, I know you think that's going to be the next thing. And no offense to my realtors, you're not doing neurosurgery. Like it is not life or death. It's an email, it's a phone call, it's a text message, it's a flyer. So what, you got a typo, great. That means you get to call them and be like, you know what, I apologize. There was a typo on that flyer. It's another point of connection. Maybe it was a purposeful mistake. I see it all the time in marketing. People are like, oops, typo in the email. You know why they do that? So they can email you again. And then now you're top of mind in the inbox because there was a mistake in the email. I'm not saying they always do it that way, but at the end of the day, use the info you have. So that's subtle enemy number 2, the antidote to it.
If you could, I want you to explain to those listening what is happening in our little reptile brains when we think that we need more information instead of just making the decision. Like, why is that the switch that gets turned on that holds us back? What's happening psychologically or biologically?
Sure. Well, our brain is wired to help us survive. And that's a good thing, right? That's how we've survived thus far as a species. But when your brain is wired for you to survive, it also means that it's not necessarily by default going to help you thrive. So when we need more info, it's a form of safety. Well, if I jump right now, what if I fall? AKA, what if I fail? If I jump right now, what if I fly? I don't know how to fly, AKA, what it's like to succeed. I've never flown this high before. What does that responsibility look like? So at the end of the day, anytime we use, I need more info, I need more time, the truth is we have a fear. And that's not bad, we're human. We have a fear of fill in the blank, messing up. We have a fear of the responsibility of it. So we're looking for safety. Information, that's why I call it the comfort blanket. But it's not fuel for success. The only thing that is actually fuel for your success is taking action. But that's hard because that means you got to step on the accelerator. You got to step on the gas, which means we're driving, we're moving. I have to perform. I have to do something. Info, and here's another way to look at it. It's like constantly inhaling or ingesting. So getting information feels good because it's like eating food. It feels good to eat, especially if it's my favorite foods. Ooh, just eat and eat and eat and eat. But what happens? You get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? If you're not moving, if you're not expelling, if you're not actually taking action with it, if I'm not moving my body, I'm just gonna grow quote unquote big with a bunch of content and info, and now I'm tired and I'm just sitting here and what happens when you eat a lot? You get sleepy, you can't move. It's the same thing in our heads. You take in all this info, you get into analysis paralysis, you can't move because you didn't do anything with it. You didn't move that fuel into actual consumed energy. And so that's why I would say that that's such a critical piece.
So what is something, you mentioned giving a deadline. Is there something that somebody should be doing or should be researching, or is it really just like give yourself a deadline and then cut yourself off? Are there any other like tactical little tidbits that somebody might want to include in that decision-making hygiene routine, so to speak?
I think one of the fastest ways for me to make a decision is, that's because I'm not as prone to wanting to research, although I definitely do that. I just like to ask who. Who is the best person to ask with regards to this particular situation? Because especially for high achievers, one of the things that's going to get you to the next level is surrounding yourself with other successful individuals with very different gifts, talents, and expertise. The worst thing you can be is the leader in the room that knows everything. The best leader in the room is the one who probably knows the least, but surrounds themselves with the people who know the most. Because at any point in time, I can grab my contact list, AKA my Rolodex, and I'm aging myself by saying that, but I could be like, you know what, I know nothing about marketing and systems and all of that and social media, but I'm gonna hit up Stephanie Lugo and Karen Ann because these women crush it when it comes to that. So now I can shortcut my way to information through your experience. And to be fair to your passions, you're way better at it than I am. So what I would spend hours on researching by myself that I don't even like, I could go to you because you already have 5 years of experience on Instagram, 10 years of experience on Instagram. I'm like, how do you make your reels look like that? So that's one way I shortcut the needing more info. Tap into your network because I can guarantee you there's an expert or someone who already has the info and the decision you need to make.
Yeah, I find myself doing that all the time, actually, and I didn't realize that was something I was doing. But I would way rather just have a conversation than read or listen to another podcast that's going to have me like ruminating for the rest of the day. I love that. Let's talk about the third enemy of success.
So third, and not a comprehensive list, but certainly I'd say in totality, remember this. The third subtle enemy to success is going to be perfectionism. And perfectionism is hard because it's disguised as high achievement, high standards, but it's actually a defense mechanism to the fear of criticism. Like if we're being honest, the only time someone is like, but it's not perfect enough, and you feel that like energy from somebody, it was like, it's not perfect, right? And it's not like I really want it to look this way, but then there's like a surrendered energy almost of like, I'm okay though if it doesn't. That's different. And that's someone who has a high standard, but they're cool if it's not to the T. But someone who's like, it has to be perfect, that often comes from the fear, and the fear of criticism. That if I am found out, if they see the mistake, oh no, my cover is blown. And not to say that you're hiding, and not to say that you're trying to pretend all of your life, but typically for most people, even the most put together, Stephanie does it all, right? Like I know that a lot of people look at you that way and they think, how do you do everything? And certainly you do a lot, but you're also not perfect. And what I love about you, Steph, is that you'll go on Instagram and you'll like tell people, I just had a horrible day. I messed up on this thing. I look a certain type of way, right? You're a great mixture of the great highlight reel, but then also the vulnerability of what goes on behind the scenes. But when people can truly admit, you know what, I actually don't feel good enough. If I'm being completely honest, I'm afraid to be found out, that it's not as put together as it seems. And I'm not saying this to call anyone out, I'm calling myself out because I struggle with this also. My husband knows this, and this is a small example of it. Often he'll be like, hey, I just want to let you know somebody's coming over to the house. And I'm like, when? And then he's like, oh, like in 5 minutes. It's not a big deal. He's just picking something up. And I look at him like he's the worst person on the planet. I'm like, but I have to clean and I have to do this and I'm wearing pajamas and this. And he's like, why? They're just picking this up. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, no, I got to clean the baseboards and I have to go launder the comforter and the sheets. He's like, they're not sleeping over. Like they are picking up a packet from me, but I need it to look perfect. And again, it's not because I'm trying to put on a show. Honestly, it's just I want the house to be nice. I want it to smell good. I want them to feel welcome, right? I have all of these things in my head, but what I noticed, even those intentions are great, why was I getting so worked up about it? Like, why couldn't I just be like, oh, that's cool. I got 5 minutes to just let me tidy up a little bit because I do want the house to look nice, versus panicking that I didn't dust the baseboards. When did I ever dust my baseboards, right? All of a sudden now somebody's coming over 5 minutes. I need it to look some type of way. And the truth is there's a part of me, if I'm being very honest, that's always like, yeah, I don't feel good enough. You know, my house doesn't look this way and I want to make sure. And again, I can mask it with, no, I just want other people to feel comfortable. And that's why I say it's the subtle enemy, is because if perfectionism has been the thing that's getting in your way, if you are struggling to complete something or put it out in time, or you've reiterated this 100 times and you still won't put out the video, you still won't send the email, you still won't put out the packet, you're like, but I don't have all of these things. That's when you know, oh, it's my enemy now. It's not an ally anymore. High standards is good. Perfectionism as a defense to criticism, fear of rejection, fear of failure, that's not your friend. That's an enemy. So the antidote to that, put it out now. Fix it later. And I know that's so hard for the perfectionists, but this is where I come in and I help them rewrite the story of how they see themselves.
That's terrible news for everyone in the room. It can be really challenging. It can be really challenging because one thing that has really struck me, and I think I've always heard this before, but I never really understood it until this year. And I don't know what changed in me this year to start feeling this on such a deep level, but it is so vulnerable. Business itself, you are so vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there in so many different ways. How does that factor into this conversation, do you think?
Meaning, how does one overcome the vulnerability, the fear?
I want to understand why there's so much vulnerability and why that comes and goes. And maybe it's just results driven. Is our worth really that tied to our results, to where the moment the results start to shift, we start to question everything and it's harder to put ourselves out there. And really, how do we overcome that? How do we tap back into that like you-ness that helps you be brave and continue doing the thing that you need to do? Because like you said earlier, that's who you're deciding that you are.
Yeah. So I'll start with this. Number one, not everyone struggles with the vulnerability because let's say they have a really strong sense of self and they're not as afraid, and that's great. So for the people here listening who are like, you know what, I don't care what other people think of me. Like, I'm gonna just do what I do And that's fantastic. For whatever reason, you've been conditioned that way. You have a strong sense of self. Perhaps that's your background. Perhaps that's your upbringing. And so that's a gift. It's a gift that actually you bring to a lot of people who might not feel so vulnerable. So I think recognizing that for those who feel very confident, own that gift and then find a way to share that gift with other people. But for those who struggle with it, whether they appear that way or not, like, yeah, if people actually knew I'm kind of afraid, that's not a bad thing. That just means, hey, there's some conditioning there. Maybe it's the way that you grew up. Maybe it's the environment you're in. And by the way, I see this a lot more for women. And it's not that men don't struggle with lack of confidence or vulnerability. But even if we're just looking at a primal level, right, a biological level, I am the smaller of the species. I am technically the weaker one, not in spirit, not in mind, not in just like emotional strength, but just real talk, my husband can bench more than I can. It just is what it is. Maybe if I work out a lot more, I can bench the same that him. But he's just stronger than I am physically. So from a primal perspective, women are naturally more vulnerable. Even my environment, I was talking to one of my clients the other day who coaches men. And he was asking the men in his group, a lot of them were struggling in their relationship with their wife. They felt like she was being, quote unquote, too emotional and overwhelmed and having a big reaction to something. And he asked his men a really interesting question. He asked them, so tell me, how many times a day when you go out to go to your car, like in the parking lot, do you wonder about your safety? And then most of the guys in the group were like, I don't know, maybe once if it's at nighttime. And they're like, okay, ask your wife how many times she thinks about her safety when she walks out during the day. And then they didn't really understand. And even I, when I heard him preface that question, I said, that's fascinating. I think about my safety constantly, but it's just a part of who I am. Like I walk outdoors and I'm like looking around, am I cool? I have a purse, I'm like, am I vulnerable? I walk around with my 2-year-old son, even if I'm in a nice neighborhood, sometimes I wonder like, oh, there's a person walking this way and they could be a seemingly kind person, but I feel so vulnerable versus, and I say this, respectfully, sometimes when I walk around with my husband, I feel a lot safer. It just is. If I walk around with a guy friend, I feel a lot safer. I don't think he necessarily feels safer when he walks around with me. I think he actually feels more burdened because he's like, great, if somebody's coming after us, I either got to protect her or I got to run or I got to do both, right? Again, this is not a commentary on just the strength of women versus the strength of men, but by nature, you have to understand that often we're just wired differently. So imagine if your brain is constantly running the programming of, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Any feeling of vulnerability, which is you could possibly not be safe right now, that's going to be more triggering for you. Even if it's not just physical safety, emotional criticism from others, that's going to make us crumble. So again, I'm speaking yes to women, but also to men, that the brain cannot tell the difference often between physical safety and emotional safety. Safety is just safety. So even if you interpret, oh my gosh, somebody just put a horrible comment on my Instagram, it can feel like somebody pointed a gun at your forehead, especially if that comment or something they said is triggering from your past. And that's why a lot of people will avoid doing something, because who wants a gun pointed at their head? Even if it's in the form of criticism, again, it can feel very scary. So hopefully that clarifies it.
That just like shook me. That actually just answered a lot of questions.
I saw you actually shake.
I know. That answered a lot of questions that I didn't realize that I had. Wow. I'm trying to decide if I need to be vulnerable and share with the epiphany that I just had. I don't want to, but I will. And I hate talking like this because I try to be very transparent with the changes that happened in me, like physically after our second son was born. He's going to be 2, and he's like such a cool kid. He's perfect, and we love him. And every time I tried to express the challenges of that jump in my life over the last 2 years, I feel as if it's expressed as like not being grateful, and that's not at all what I'm going for, but more so just to offer the perspective for others who may feel ashamed of having felt the same way that I do, because I have a lot of shame with it. But when I had him, I had massive postpartum anxiety and depression, and I've always been a more anxious, wired higher, kind of like a higher energy person. and it became absolutely debilitating to where I couldn't function. And there were a lot of just like the like terrible thoughts that come with that, and the, what is it called when the thoughts just jump into your head, right?
Oh,
Intrusive thoughts. Yeah, it was, and I had never experienced anything like that, and it was absolutely shocking to me. And I was able to get the help that I needed for it, and I was able to, after about a year, a little more than a year, I was finally feeling like myself again. But I haven't been able to get back to that because I felt so unsafe, because I felt as if I could not show up and be the professional that I need to be for the last 2 years. And anyone on the outside, I don't know that would have been necessarily apparent, because you do so much to overcompensate.
Yeah.
But on the inside this year, I have felt so vulnerable. And I'm like, where is this feeling coming from? Why do I feel as if I'm not good enough? Why do I feel like I have to ask for permission so much more than I typically have in the past? Why am I so oversensitive to how others are experiencing what we are doing for them, whether it's our real estate clients or whatever? And I feel as if that's almost like a trauma response to that feeling of having, like, not being safe. Like, I can't operate, which means I won't make enough money, which means my family won't be okay. Is that what's happening there? Is that like a real life illustration of what you just kind of explained?
That thought process is it, right? You actually just got to the root of it. So when I'm coaching, I call it the 7-layer dip. And if y'all ever had 7-layer dip, right, it's like sour cream on top, guacamole, I know, beans, like the whole nine, the cheese. But if you only take the top layer, I only got the sour cream. Okay. But if I get 1 and 2 layers, okay, I got a little bit more flavor. And it's not until I get to the 7th layer with somebody, which means I typically will ask them the exact same question over and over and over again until we get to the truth. So I like to call it the BS answer. Your belief system, not the other one. Belief system answer, the programmed answer. And then we get to the truth. How do I know I get to the truth? Typically, somebody will cry. Yeah, like everybody here was like, oh no, I'm out. This podcast has been nice, but I'm good. And it not always, but there's a change in their face. There's a change in their eyes. Why? Because the body never lies. And that's a good litmus test for anybody. Did I get to my truth? How do I know? You'll feel it. Like you'll feel it in your chest, you'll feel it in your stomach, your throat gets all, like, because the words that we use, the thoughts that we think, you know, the sort of program, like, okay, this is my answer for that. That's fine. We all have that. And that's okay. That uses us to protect. And I can see it in you right now.
Yeah.
And I appreciate it. But the tears, the water that comes out. And I'm going to look this way. I know it's not at the camera, but that right there, that's the truth that sets you free. So for all of us who feel at some point I'm not free completely at this part of my life, we got to get to the truth of it. Not to shame you, not to guilt you, not to get you to, I'm not trying to do therapy, Coach K. I'm not trying to get you to do therapy, although therapy is good for many of you and we all need it. But until you can unlock that layer, the layer that has been sitting on you for so long, and it's like, no matter how much I achieve, no matter how much money I make, no matter how much I do, no matter how many things I help this person or these people with, it will never help me compensate for or address this thing. That's the piece right there. So with these subtle enemies, and that's why if you notice, they all seem good. And the reason I talk about this, or I've studied it, is because for high achievers, the reason most high achievers are quote unquote high achievers is what you said. We are overcompensating for something. That's why it's called overachievement. For my overachievers, anytime you have to over something or under something, if you're an underachiever or an overachiever, you are compensating for something. Meaning, this is my drug of choice. It's just that luckily society rewards me for my drug of choice, because it isn't methamphetamines, cocaine, weed, alcohol, all the stuff that we poo-poo on. We like the story of when they overcome it, right? But it's like, oh yeah, we look down on that. But I made more money. I work more hours than anybody else. I'm number one in X, Y, and Z. That looks really good to society. In fact, I get likes, follows, people join my, mastermind, whatever. So we think, great, this drug is okay. Everybody in society likes this drug. So we keep taking it and taking it. And that's why for people who make a lot of money but still feel so disconnected from who they truly are, or from their real purpose. That's where they struggle, because it's like, I don't get it. I did all of the things. Why am I still miserable? Or what is still missing? And that's a different podcast and a different question. But I just want to point to, that's why I want us to be careful of the subtle enemies that look so good on the surface. They sound so nice when it's coming out of our mouth. But if it, and you said this best, if it is starting to debilitate your life, if it's actually hurting you more than it's helping you, that's where we got to get the support that you need. Even for the high achiever who looks like they have it all together on Instagram, that's the person you probably want to check on the most.
That was amazing, and I didn't plan on going there, and I appreciate all of you for giving me a safe space to have that conversation. That was really hard. Yeah. So I have one last question, if we can.
Yeah.
And I would like to look at the other side of this coin. I'm like still reeling over here. I want to look at the other side of this coin. When you have everything and everything's feeling good, you know there's a little more juice left to squeeze. Yeah. And that's scary. And like getting to that next level and not understanding how that's going to impact your life. It's a little bit of the same conversation, but maybe from the other side of it, breaking through that next level, the fear. What's holding us back there? Is it one of these subtle enemies of success, or is it more so the unknowing, or is there something else that we're not tapping into? Ooh, that was a wordy question. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
The quote unquote next level, for a lot of folks, the reason that can be extremely scary is because it is the unknown.
Yeah.
Right? It's just another version of, I like this comfort zone of success. The next one sounds really great. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, I would love to be able to say that. But the truth is, I don't know that person yet. I don't know her. I don't know him. I've never lived that. My family's only gotten to this point in our education. My family's only gotten to this point in our finances. I've only ever gotten to this point, and I know this system really well. Can I handle that one? Sounds nice in theory, but there's all of these, again, fears, and we're just primally wired to be afraid of the unknown. It's like if I'm walking in the dark, but haven't any of you guys ever walked in a room that's lights off, but you've been in that room a million times? You're fine. Because it's like, oh, well, I know the bed's here, the lamp's here. So even if the room is dark, no big deal, because I've been here before. So I know where everything is. But now I put you in a room that you've never been in, and then I turn off the lights. Now it's very scary, because, well, like, there's a hole in the ground? Is that door going to lead to something? Like, I don't know this room. That's why that quote unquote next level can be very scary, because it's often a room I've never been in before. I could walk in the dark, AKA a challenging time, an adversity, a failure, all day, every day in real estate, because I've been in it for 20 years as a solo agent. I know what this is like. I know I could just grit my teeth, knock on doors, do this. But to now manage a team of 20, to now be able to have a membership group of 1,000 people, to now be able to step on stage and speak to 10,000 people, and then have all of those people give me feedback all at the same time through a particular number or website that I put up. I don't know that one yet. So for some people, that's very exciting. But for most people, it's absolutely terrifying. And here's the last thing I'll say on it. What is not only scary is, oh, I don't know what this is like, but probably the most difficult thing to accept is you have to become a new person. It's not even a quote unquote better version of who you used to be. And you said this actually when you mentioned the anxiety. I tried to get back to who I was, and it was really hard. And that's actually not what you were supposed to do. It was actually about moving forward into the completely new version of you, because to go back to who you were was not a mom of 2. Back to who you were was a mom of 1, or maybe just a mom, not even a mom yet. To go back to who you were was a woman who didn't have this many members or wasn't working at this much real estate. And she wasn't the woman who was in this society in this day and time with all of these tools and technology. So the better question is, oh, who do I need to become in order to get to the next level? And that's a big question. Identity is one of the things we'll talk about today in the workshop, but that's probably one of the hardest to get to.
have no notes. I got nothing. That is amazing. I want to thank you so much for your dedication to honing your skill and your craft. It is such a gift to have this conversation with you today and to share it with those who are listening. I just think the world of you, of course. But is there anything that you want to say to end? Or if anyone who's watching this recording later, how can they find you?
The last thing I will say is don't rush through this process. You all have a lifetime to do this. And I really mean that. So my company is called The Ultimate Life. It's not called The Ultimate Business, although I work with business owners. It's not called The Ultimate Minute. It's not called The Ultimate 30 Days, although I have 30-day challenges. It's The Ultimate Life. I think the pressure sometimes to be like, all right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get it all done in the next 90 days, the next 365 days, right? And that's high achievers, how we're wired. Like, I want it done now. I want the transformation now. I want my identity at the end of 2 hours, Coach K. I want to know who I am. And I see this a lot. I go to a lot of seminars and I see the seminar junkies and I'm like, oh, this is not going to be good. Because they're going to be good for 5 days and then there's going to be a dip after the high is over. By the way, sorry for all the drug references, but sometimes it's just easy. I think we all understand it quite well. Not calling anybody out, but work with a lot of high achievers. The stuff they all do sometimes, it baffles me. But I would say take your time with it. If you need your whole life to figure this out, great. You got the greatest adventure ahead of you in your whole life. But there is no need to rush through this. There will be more personalities for you to meet, more people for you to help. And for some people, what you think is a delay is sometimes just divine guidance, because had I not been delayed, I would have never met this person. Had I not been delayed, me and my partner would have never had this conversation. Had I not been delayed, I would have never walked into this really fun coffee shop. Then I got to meet this individual. So I think just remembering that life is happening for you, not to you, as is often said. And if you can take the time to find the gifts, this process that we're going to go through right after this is going to be even more blessed for you. And then on a logistical level, yes, if they want to reach me, coach with me, you can find me on Instagram. Just find I'm Kamille Rose, that's my personal page. And then at The Ultimate Life, LYFE, and that's the podcast that I do. So you can follow me on both of those places.
Thank you, Kamille. Kamille Rose Taylor, Ultimate Life.